It began with a meeting that was never supposed to attract attention. Behind closed palace doors, Princess Anne gathered a small circle of trusted advisors while senior aides were instructed to remain silent. Within hours, whispers spread through royal corridors that something extraordinary had happened. By the next morning, those whispers had to become a storm. Reports suggested Anne had taken a step no royal expected, and Harry was at the center of it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, it sounded impossible. Princess Anne, known for discipline, silence, and duty, was not the kind of royal to act out of emotion. She did not chase headlines. She did not play public games. But behind the calm face of the palace, something had shifted. Sources claimed the meeting was not casual, not symbolic, and not routine. It was said to involve senior Commonwealth advisors, quiet legal voices, and people who understood the weight of royal patronage. That alone was enough to raise concern. Because when Anne steps into a room like that, the matter is rarely small. Palace aides were reportedly told not to speak, not to confirm, and not to deny. That silence only made the rumors louder. Soon, questions began spreading through royal circles. Was Harry's Commonwealth role being reviewed? Had his name been placed before a private royal decision? And most chilling of all, had Anne finally decided that enough damage had been done? For years, Harry's relationship with the institution had been cracking under the pressure of public disputes, interviews, accusations, and broken trust. But this was different. This was not about hurt feelings or family tension. This touched the Commonwealth, one of the monarchy's most sensitive legacies. To many inside the old guard, that legacy was not a platform to be carried when convenient. It was a sacred duty. And reports suggested Anne believed that duty could no longer be treated lightly. While she remained silent, the palace atmosphere grew colder. Media insiders began whispering that long-standing frustrations had finally reached the edge. Some wondered whether King Charles had approved the move. Others questioned whether William quietly supported it. But everyone understood one thing. If Anne had truly acted, then this was not a warning, it was a line being drawn, and Harry, once seen as a proud face of royal service, now stood at the center of a storm that threatened to redefine his place forever. But this sudden decision did not appear from nowhere. It was rooted in years of growing frustration that had been building behind palace walls. Long before this alleged decree shook royal circles, cracks had already begun to form. What once appeared to be a strong connection between Harry and the institution he represented gradually transformed into something far more complicated. And according to insiders, Princess Anne had been watching every step. In the early years, Harry's place within Commonwealth-related work carried a certain promise. He was seen by many as a younger royal who could speak to a new generation, someone who could bring warmth, energy, and attention to causes that often lived far from the center of palace headlines. There was optimism then. There was belief. There was a feeling that his role could grow into something meaningful, something that honored both the crown and the wider family of nations connected to it. But slowly, that promise began to fade under the weight of conflict. After major family disputes became public, Harry's distance from royal duty no longer looked temporary. It began to look like a break that kept widening with every interview, every painful claim, every moment where private wounds became public battles. Inside traditional royal circles, concern quietly hardened into alarm. The Commonwealth was not viewed as a stage for personal branding. It was seen as a sacred responsibility, tied to history, service, and trust. And for Princess Anne, trust was never something to be treated lightly. She had spent decades carrying out duty without complaint, building a reputation not through noise, but through discipline. So when questions began rising about whether Harry could still represent that legacy, Anne's silence became more powerful than any statement. Reports suggested internal debates grew sharper. Some voices urged patience, hoping time might soften the damage. Others believed accountability could no longer be delayed. Palace leadership faced pressure from every direction, caught between family emotion and institutional survival. And in that pressure, Anne's position reportedly became clearer. This was not about revenge. It was about standards. It was about whether a royal could step away from the weight of duty yet still hold the honor that came with it. As public controversies continued to build, senior royals began to see the situation not as a passing storm, but as a test of the monarchy's future strength. Patience, once carefully preserved, was running thin. And behind the polished palace language, one fear was growing louder. If the crown did not draw a line now, it might lose the authority to draw one later. Yet concerns about duty were only one piece of the puzzle, because a series of events would soon force the issue into the open. Every royal crisis has a tipping point. According to reports, what had once been viewed as manageable disagreements eventually evolved into something far more serious. With each headline, interview, and public statement, pressure mounted on the institution and on those determined to protect it. The trouble was no longer contained inside private family wounds. It had spilled into the public arena, where every word was pulled apart, every accusation replayed, and every silence treated like a confession. For the palace, this was dangerous, not because criticism was new, but because the criticism now touched trust itself. Harry's interviews had already shaken the old royal order, but the memoir-related storm deepened the sense that something sacred had been broken. Private pain had become public material. Palace conversations, family tensions, and personal grievances were no longer hidden behind closed doors. They were discussed across the world, turning royal duty into a global argument. And for those who believed the monarchy survived through restraint, this was a wound that could not easily heal. Reports suggested that some Commonwealth representatives began asking quiet questions. Could someone so publicly separated from royal duty still remain connected to Commonwealth honor? Could the institution defend tradition while allowing unresolved controversy to sit beside its name? These questions did not need loud answers to cause damage. Their very existence was enough. Inside royal circles, the mood reportedly changed from concern to calculation. Senior figures were said to be weighing the long-term cost of doing nothing. Because if the palace ignored the problem, critics might say the crown feared confrontation. But if it acted, the royal family could face another wave of emotional fallout. This was the trap. Every path carried risk. And in that tense space, Princess Anne's role grew more important. She was not seen as sentimental. She was not easily moved by public pressure. Her loyalty was to duty first, comfort second. As discussions became more serious, insiders claimed Anne began stepping closer to the center of strategy, asking the kind of hard questions others avoided. What does patronage mean if service is no longer active? What does representation mean if trust has been fractured? And what happens when personal freedom begins to clash with institutional responsibility? These were not small questions. They cut straight into the future of the monarchy. By then, speculation about formal action was no longer dismissed as wild rumor. It felt like something was forming quietly, deliberately, and with chilling patience. The palace had endured storms before, but this one carried a sharper edge. It was not only about Harry's past choices. It was about whether the crown still had the will to defend its own standards. As criticism intensified, attention shifted toward the woman many viewed as the monarchy's most relentless defender. Princess Anne rarely seeks headlines. She does not rely on dramatic speeches or public confrontations. Yet those familiar with palace operations often describe her as one of the most powerful figures behind the scenes. And when she moves with purpose. For decades, Anne built her influence in the hardest way possible. Through work, loyalty, and absolute discipline. She became the royal who did not need applause to prove her value. She attended engagements, carried responsibilities, and defended the old rules without turning duty into performance. That is why, according to Palace Whispers, her quiet involvement in Harry's Commonwealth review carried such weight. It did not feel impulsive. It felt prepared. Reports suggested Anne began consulting carefully, not with noisy buck allies but with constitutional voices, Commonwealth advisors, and trusted figures who understood how dangerous a wrong move could be. This was not a family argument dressed up as policy. It was a question of royal meaning. Could someone remain tied to a role built on service while standing so far from the working structure that protected it? Anne reportedly wanted that question answered without emotion, without drama, and without weakness. In traditional royal circles, her position found sympathy. Many believed the monarchy had already given Harry room, time, and silence, but silence, they feared, had been mistaken for surrender. Behind closed doors, the review of Harry's standing was said to become sharper, more detailed, and more unforgiving. Responsibilities were weighed against actions. Honor was weighed against trust. History was weighed against the damage of recent years. And each time the balance was examined, one conclusion seemed harder to avoid. Action could no longer be delayed. Still, Anne knew the danger. A direct move against Harry would ignite headlines across the world. It would reopen wounds inside the family and invite accusations of cruelty. But doing nothing carried its own cost. It risked telling the public that royal titles and patronage could survive even when trust had fractured. That was the line Anne was reportedly unwilling to cross, so strategy unfolded away from public attention, in careful conversations and guarded recommendations. There were no loud warnings, no emotional threats, just the slow construction of a decision that felt colder because it was calm. Rumors began to spread that a formal recommendation was taking shape, one that would place Harry's Commonwealth connection under permanent question. And once that possibility entered the palace bloodstream, the atmosphere changed. This was no longer speculation drifting through royal corridors. It felt like the machinery of the crown had started moving. Then came the moment that transformed months of speculation into a controversy that stunned royal watchers everywhere. When reports emerged that Anne had allegedly endorsed a decree stripping Harry of his Commonwealth patronage permanently, the reaction was immediate. Supporters called it a necessary defense of tradition. Critics described it as one of the most dramatic royal developments in years. The palace, as always, did not rush to explain itself, and that silence became part of the shock. Details began moving through royal circles in fragments, each one more serious than the last. Some claimed the decree had been shaped after months of private review. Others believed it carried the fingerprints of those who had grown tired of waiting for the storm around Harry to settle on its own. What made the moment explosive was not only the alleged punishment, but the word permanently. That single word changed everything. It suggested this was not a pause, not a warning, not a temporary cooling of royal ties. Sounded final. Inside the palace, sources described a mood of surprise mixed with concern. Even those who believed action was coming reportedly did not expect the move to land with such force. Questions quickly followed. Did Anne have the authority to push such a recommendation? Had Charles quietly accepted it? Was William involved in the background? And most importantly, what did this mean for Harry's place in the royal story going forward? The debate over precedent became fierce because royal patronage has always carried meaning beyond ceremony. It is not just a name attached to a cause. It is a symbol of trust, loyalty, and public responsibility. To remove it permanently would send a message not only to Harry, but to every royal watching from the edges of the institution. The media frenzy spread fast. International outlets seized on the drama, framing it as another painful break between Harry and the family he once served. Supporters of the reported decision argued that the crown could not keep rewarding distance while demanding duty from others. Critics saw something colder, a hardening of palace walls at the very moment reconciliation seemed most needed. The public split almost instantly. Some viewed Anne as the only royal strong enough to defend the institution without apology. Others wondered whether the monarchy was risking another emotional wound it could not afford. But as the debate widened, Commonwealth connections became the true center of gravity. This was no longer just about Harry's personal future. It was about whether the monarchy could protect roles tied to history, service, and national identity without being accused of cruelty. Royal commentators warned the consequences could last for years, perhaps even reshaping how future non-working royals are treated. And beneath the noise, one truth became harder to ignore. This alleged decree had reopened every unresolved question Harry left behind. But while headlines focused on Harry, the deeper impact was unfolding inside the royal family itself. For Harry, the reported loss of a Commonwealth patronage would represent more than a title or position. It would symbolize another widening gap between himself and the institution that once shaped his identity from birth. For years, Harry's public story had been tied to service, duty, and the hope that he could carry royal work in a more modern way. The Commonwealth connection was part of that image. It gave him a place inside something larger than personal conflict, something linked to history, ceremony, and the long shadow of the crown. But if the reported decree stood, that connection would no longer feel secure. It would become another symbol of distance, another sign that the bridge between Harry and the palace had weakened almost beyond repair. Supporters would likely see the moment as painful but understandable, arguing that trust must be earned before honor can be restored. Critics would call it harsh, another wound added to an already broken family story. And somewhere between those two views sat the deeper tragedy. Harry was not simply being discussed as a prince anymore, but as a question the monarchy still did not know how to answer. Could he return? Could he rebuild trust? Could any future opportunity be offered without reopening the same old arguments? These questions carried emotional weight because Harry's identity had once been built inside the royal system. He had grown up under its rules, served under its expectations, and stood beside the very institution he now seemed separated from. That contrast made the reported loss feel sharper. It was not just about what was taken away, it was about what had already been lost. Public perception began to harden on both sides. To some, Harry had chosen independence and now had to accept the cost. To others, the palace appeared unwilling to leave space for healing. But inside the wider royal narrative, the impact on his personal legacy was impossible to ignore. Every removed role, every frozen honor, every closed door added another layer to the story future generations would tell. Reconciliation, once spoken of as possible, now seemed trapped behind suspicion. Even if words were exchanged privately, trust would not be rebuilt by sentiment alone. It would require time, restraint, and a willingness to accept responsibility on all sides. And that was the hardest part, because as uncertainty grew, no one could say whether this was a temporary low point or a permanent reshaping of Harry's place in royal history. What came next remained clouded, but the message behind the reported move was unmistakable. The crown was tightening its definition of duty, yet the story was never solely about one prince, it was about the future direction of the monarchy itself. Behind every royal controversy lies a larger struggle. According to observers, this dispute reflects a deeper battle over what the monarchy should become in the years ahead. Tradition and change are colliding once again, and neither side appears willing to step back. At the center of it all stands a painful question. Can the monarchy modernize without weakening the very rules that keep it alive? For some, Harry's story represents freedom, openness, and a refusal to remain trapped by an old system. For others, it represents a dangerous break from the discipline that royal life demands. And that is why Anne's reported move carried such force. It was not only about one patronage. It was about the line between personal choice and public duty. Anne, in this telling, became the guardian of established principles, the royal figure willing to say what others might only whisper. Her position reflected a belief that service must mean sacrifice, and that royal honor cannot be separated from royal responsibility. Yet the pressure facing the monarchy was not simple. Public expectations had changed. People wanted honesty, compassion, and accountability from senior royals. They also wanted stability, dignity, and restraint. Those demands often pulled in opposite directions, leaving the institution caught between the old world and the new. Commonwealth relationships now sat under renewed scrutiny, because they carried both history and sensitivity. Any decision tied to them could echo far beyond palace walls. If the crown appeared too harsh, it risked seeming cold. If it appeared too soft, it risked losing authority. This was the narrow path senior royals now had to walk. William's future leadership also became part of the debate. As heir, he would inherit not only the throne's privileges, but its unresolved tensions. The lessons drawn from Harry's controversies may shape how William handles titles, patronages, and non-working royals in the years ahead. Would he choose mercy? Would he choose firmness? Or would he create a new royal order where roles are defined more clearly than ever before? These questions carried the weight of the monarchy's survival. Behind the headlines, the institution appeared to be studying its own wounds, asking where trust had failed and how it could be rebuilt without inviting fresh damage. Anne's reported stance sent one message clearly: The crown could not afford confusion about duty. But Harry's situation also revealed something uncomfortable. The royal family could not keep relying on silence to solve every crisis. The world had changed, and every private fracture now had public consequences. So the monarchy stood at a defining crossroads, pulled between tradition and reinvention, between loyalty and freedom, between family pain and institutional protection. And as the dust began to settle, one final question remained unanswered. The real significance of this controversy may not be measured in headlines, titles, or official statements. Instead, it may be remembered as the moment the monarchy sent a message about duty, responsibility, and the cost of walking away from tradition. In the end, Anne's reported decision was never just about Harry's name on a list or his connection to a patronage. It was about the meaning behind royal service itself. To supporters, Anne appeared as the steady hand of the old guard, reminding the world that honor cannot survive without loyalty. To critics, the move felt severe, another painful sign that the family divide had deepened beyond easy repair. But whatever side people chose, the message carried weight. Harry's place in royal history was changing again, not through one sudden moment, but through a long series of choices, wounds, and consequences that kept pulling him further from the institution that once defined him. Public reaction would continue to split sharply. Some would compare this moment to past royal reckonings, when the crown chose survival over sentiment. Others would argue that modern monarchy must leave room for forgiveness, especially when family pain has already become so public. Yet the deeper lesson remained difficult to ignore. A royal life offers privilege, but it also demands restraint. It offers visibility, but it also requires sacrifice. And when personal freedom begins to stand against inherited duty, the price can be brutal. For future generations of royals, this controversy may become a warning carved into the quiet rules of palace life. Titles, patronages, and public honor may no longer be allowed to float freely away from service. The monarchy, facing pressure from every direction, appears determined to protect stability even when the emotional cost is high. Still, unanswered questions linger. Could Harry ever rebuild the trust that has been lost? Could the palace soften its position with time? Could Anne's reported stand become the foundation of a stricter royal future under William? No one can say with certainty. But the shadow of this decision will not disappear quickly. It will live in royal commentary, in public debate, and in every future discussion about who gets to represent the crown. Perhaps that is why this chapter feels so heavy. It is not only the story of removal. It is the story of a monarchy trying to decide what it will tolerate, what it will forgive, and what it must defend at any cost. Whether viewed as justice, necessity, or controversy, this royal chapter may shape the monarchy's future long after today's headlines fade away. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.